Hello, all my YouTube friends, and welcome back. I don't know what you've been doing to pass the time, but I've decided to take this opportunity to fill a big hole in my education. I feel like it's an area I've overlooked in my life, and so I wanted to take the opportunity while I'm under quarantine and all this stuff is going on to try to really expand my base of knowledge and my cultural literacy by reading something that I've never read before. And that is the works of William Shakespeare. Now, I've never been a big Shakespeare guy. I've never really got it. I've seen a bunch of his plays over the years. I've seen probably, close to 10 or a dozen of his plays. I've never really enjoyed them. And part of that, I think, is that I don't like theater very much. I don't like theatrical acting. I find it really artificial and unrealistic, and I have a hard time paying attention to it and enjoying it. So I think maybe part of the reason why Shakespearean actors are regarded as the best actors is because it's really difficult to make that kind of poetry sound natural and sound understandable from the stage. And if you can do that, you can do anything. I don't know. But I've never appreciated it, and I've never enjoyed it. I've seen many movies that are based on his plays. I've just never gotten it. But I've never read them. I've never actually sat down with the text and read them. And one of the things about reading a play versus seeing a play is when you're watching it live, you have to follow along at the speed of the actors. When they say a line, you only have until the next line to really parse it and figure out what they're talking about and appreciate the poetry, and you're trying to follow the plot and all that. When you're reading it, you can stop. You can take your time. You can go over lines again and again. You can try to get the puns and all the wordplay that's going on, all the historical references. There's a lot to dive into because it's pretty deep. It has a lot of hidden meanings, a lot of puns. And it was, of course, written in early modern English in the 16th century, which is a little bit more difficult for us to read here in the 21st century. We're 500 years old at this point. So I wanted to take the time to sit down and read some of his plays. So I got this. It's the complete works of William Shakespeare in this handsome leather-bound edition from Barnes & Noble. I got it used from a half-price books in Marietta, Georgia. And I've started going through it. And so far I've read the first 4 plays. This is organized in roughly chronological order. A lot of them do a different kind of organization based on tragedies and comedies and histories. This one doesn't do that. It tries to present them in roughly the order that Shakespeare wrote them. And so I've been going through it. And the first 4 plays are a tetralogy that deal with the War of the Roses. And they are Henry VI Part 1, Henry VI Part 2, Henry VI Part 3, and Richard III. And one of the other things that I thought was interesting about going through these works one at a time is Shakespeare wrote a lot of plays, and you don't see very many of them very often. If you're going to see a Shakespeare play performed, odds are it's going to be Romeo and Juliet or Hamlet. If it's not one of those two, if you're lucky, you get something like Othello or Midsummer Night's Dream, but there's probably only like half a dozen that are regularly performed that people see. And there's a ton of other ones in there that I don't know anything about. There's, when's the last time you saw a performance of Coriolanus or Troilus and Cressida or King John? These plays that nobody ever pays attention to. So I want to go through and read all of them from beginning to end. And so far I've gotten through the first 4, which form a tetralogy that deal with the history of England, starting with the death of King Henry V. Okay, so what do I think so far? I'm actually enjoying it a lot more than I thought I would. There's some good plots, there's some good action, there's some good poetry, there's some interesting characters. These are his earliest plays, so they're not widely regarded as his best, although Richard III is pretty highly regarded. But it's an interesting starting place. And I don't know very much about the history of the British monarchy or the War of the Roses, so I'm learning a little bit of that too, which is enjoyable. I like to fill in my knowledge on those sorts of things. The first play, Henry VI Part 1, starts with the death of Henry V, and his infant son, Henry VI, attains the crown at the age of 9 months old. They kind of skip over that in the play and go to a point where he's adult enough to actually do some ruling. And it has to do with the war in France and sort of the beginnings of the squabbles between the House of Lancaster, to which Henry belongs, and the House of York, which has a alternate claim to the crown. Then Henry VI Part 2, which is actually my favorite of the 4 plays I read, is very much about the various lords and nobles kind of squabbling over the crown and infighting and backstabbing and all that. And I thought that one was kind of a lot of fun. And there's always there's usually a witch or a magician of some sort that Shakespeare likes to throw in, which I always get a kick out of and have a good time with. Then King Henry VI Part 3 is sort of about the War of the Roses proper, the war between the House of York and the Lancasters, and the dethroning of Henry VI, and you have Edward IV ascend the throne, and all the kind of drama that goes along with that. There's a lot of action and a lot of war. And then the fourth play, Richard III, is the famous one, and that's about the scheming of the brother of the king, Edward IV, to try to get onto the throne. Richard III is Edward IV's brother, and he's an admitted villain, and he tries to grab power and get the throne. And that's where you have famous lines like, "Now is the winter of our discontent," and "My horse, a horse, my kingdom for a horse." Lots of famous lines in this one. I actually liked Henry VI Part 2 better than Richard III, because although Richard III has a lot of great lines in it and it has some good action and some good characters, it's very long, and there's a lot of kind of filler in there that I didn't care for. And it's also confusing because every character has the same name as another character. There's like 3 Edwards and 3 Richards and 4 Henrys, and it's a little bit hard to keep track of all that, and I found that a bit dull. Also, Richard as a character, he's often presented as this like great villain, and he kind of is, and he's got a lot of great soliloquies that he says, which are a lot of fun. But he goes around like admitting to the audience what a bad guy he is. "I'm evil. I'm going to take over. What an evil man I am." And that sort of breaks the first rule of villains when you're writing. You don't want your villains to go around proclaiming to everyone what a villain he is. The villain is supposed to be relatable, and the villain is supposed to think that he's in the right. The villain thinks, "I'm doing the right thing and no one else understands because they're too stupid to understand, or because they don't have the courage to do what it takes to do the right thing." And it's this fanaticism and conviction that they're doing the right thing that makes a great villain, I think. And so Richard is sort of undermined for me in that he's this caricature of a villain who goes around twirling his mustache and saying, "I'm a bad guy. Look at how bad I am." Which I don't think is great writing on Shakespeare's part. It's not great character development. But overall, I did enjoy the 4 plays, and I learned a lot about England's history. I had to do a little bit of supplemental research to kind of figure out what was going on in the war between the Yorkists and the Lancastrians, because I don't have that kind of historical background that they would have had at the time. Or that people have now who are interested in that sort of thing. So that was really educational to me, and I enjoyed that. It's been said, apparently, that these are like the first plays about England's history that had ever been written, but other people dispute that, so I don't know whether that's true or not. And it's also been said that Shakespeare had help, particularly writing the first play, Henry VI Part 1, that some of the other playwrights at the time kind of collaborated with him and helped him do that. I know there's a lot of controversy about whether Shakespeare really wrote his plays or not. I guess it doesn't really matter at this point. We have the text for what it is. But, I learned a lot from it, and it's interesting, and I'm getting more comfortable with the language and learning how to parse it a little bit. So I'm going to do a series of these videos as I get through this volume. Like I said, I did the first 4. I'll probably, like every 4 plays or so, I'll check in with you guys and let you know how I'm coming along with it and which ones I like and which ones I don't like. The next play in the folio is Titus Andronicus, which will be a little bit of a different change of pace because it'll be taking place in ancient Rome rather than in, comparatively medieval England. So and a little bit less historical in basis, I suppose. Probably a little bit more artistic license taken with history. So that'll be a lot of fun. I'm interested to see how that plays out. And I'm interested to get into some of the comedies as well, because I don't know his comedies that well. I think the next one after Titus Andronicus is a comedy of errors. So that should be fun. We'll see if his humor translates to the modern era. But that's what I've been working on, Shakespeare Complete Works. I'll check back when I finish another 4 plays and let you know what I think. And you should let me know what you think. Have you seen these plays performed? Have you read them? Do you think they're any good? What do you think of Shakespeare in general? Leave me a comment in the comments, and I'll be sure to read it and hopefully respond. Thanks so much for watching. I've been your host, Logan Albright, and have a good quarantine. I'll catch you next time.